Hello, writing friends. Today's another car vlog entry as I get ready to go into the library and work on my memoir today. Three things I want to talk about as I head inside is how I have discovered the theme of my book and how I've experienced a spiritual attack lately that I feel is aimed against my writing, and also how I'm working on structuring my book, like what my process is looking like. So the first one is, how have I discovered the theme of my book? Well, one thing that I learned years ago when I started hatching the idea of this memoir is that you need some kind of underlying theme or some kind of a structural net that holds everything together. And I thought, how am I ever going to find that? I have no idea what the theme of my life is. I just know that I have a collection of stories that are interesting that I want to tell. Well, I've had to think about that for many years, and mostly I've come up with, I have no idea. That's mostly the answer I've come up with. But lately it's been kind of distilling upon me what the theme of my book is going to be. And before I tell you what those themes are, and by the way, who knows, they could be subject to change. But before I tell you what those are, I will say that the way I've discovered them is a process of self-observation. So just knowing for a few years that I'm going to need a theme has made me wonder, well, what is the theme of the stories that I tell? And fortunately or unfortunately, whatever it might be, I've spent a lot of time in reflecting on the stories of my life, and some of it has been really depressing, and I've felt a certain amount of self-pity for that, and I thought, well, the theme certainly can't be self-pity. This is a piece of garbage if that's all it is. And I've understood that just means my own internal work is not done. I'm still in a place of evolution. And that's where I've been for lots of years. And I wouldn't say self-pity's been the main thing. There's been so much, but that's just a little common thread that I've thought, ooh, that's nasty. I want to make sure that is not anything a part of my book. So I've been asking myself for years, and more lately, though, I've been coming up with an answer. And that is, what do these stories mean in my life? And I'm so gratified to notice that I'm changing, I'm evolving, and there's been a good chunk of time where I'm starting to see I'm not having self-pity or even anger at others or anything like that be part of my, underlying net of what I feel about my life. I'm starting to get something more mature and more like able to be shared. And so as I'm thinking about my stories, I think, what have I learned from this? If I was sharing this with somebody else, what would I want them to get out of it in a way that would actually help them, that would move the needle forward on their own growth, that would inspire them without being preachy, without being contrived, without being prematurely formed. It needs to be organic. It needs to be genuine, like a real mature experiencing of my life stories in a way that I'm now ready to share it from a place of wisdom. What is that underlying net or structure that seems to be like the heartbeat that keeps popping up in these stories? So as I've reflected on the stories, I have seen several themes start to surface, and I'll share those with you. And again, we'll see if that's what sticks and stays around or not. The first thing I'm noticing in my stories is this theme of accepting other people's choices. That there's been lots of situations in my life where I've thought if other people made different choices, I would be happier. And I've come to a place where I'm realizing that there is so much beauty in just making the choices that are right for me, while accepting that other people are going to do them. And that is not only fine, it's great. It's great. So that's one theme. The next one that I have noticed, again, as I'm just observing my own stories, observing what bubbles up for me, like wisdom-wise, when I'm coming at it from a place of maturity and I've grown through my problems. I'm not still bleeding from them. I've actually learned and matured in that. The next theme would be that I have experienced a lot of what I would say is difficulty knowing the truth. So I feel like that's a second theme, is just the difficulty of identifying truth to begin with. What is true anyway? And that's because of in a lot of my stories, I get conflicting versions of what is happening in my family, or I have conflicting versions in my own head about who I am. And I've had a lot of struggle to figure out what is even true anyway, and how do I know? And so that, I think, has kind of bubbled up as a theme that if I look across my life, something I've had to really battle and contend with in my stories. The last one that I feel has really surfaced for me is growth and joy from trials. That we can have so much happiness and so much just explosion of a maturing, flowering growth as we grow through those awful things that are hurled our way. I have had my fair share of just intense trauma and grief. And if there's one thing I can take out of it, it's that I'm happier than ever because of it. I have learned what to value, and I've learned what to watch for, and I've learned how bad it really can get if you're not trying. And I've learned to just really appreciate that messy process, that if I hadn't gone through things I've gone through, I wouldn't be nearly as happy as I am. A lot of my happiness actually relies on the fact that I've been through very hard times. And so that, I would say, is a third theme. I'm gratified and happy to be coming up with some themes, to be seeing that after years of wondering what could it all mean other than it's a fun collection of crazy stories. I'm excited to see that there is, I would say, an underlying heartbeat, an underlying set of lessons that I can share. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about, was coming up with those themes. And if you're struggling with coming up with themes for your memoir, I would just say, I get it. The struggle is real. That as you're just thinking about the stories that you want to share, it's normal to say, well, I just want to tell these stories. What's the matter with that? Why do I have to have some life lesson? And I just want to say that's fine. That's normal. Just know that if you sit with it, keep noticing what stories come up for you and asking yourself, what have I learned from that? What could I learn from that? And let it sit. Just let it sit for a while, and it will start to be apparent. But what you don't want to do is go to that other extreme of be like, ooh, I'm going to use this as a teaching tool to teach people, because no one wants to be preached to. It's more like, I want to share what I've genuinely learned from my life, rather than, hey, I'm going to be some kind of evangelist for some moral lesson, because that feels super third grade lesson, like Sunday school lesson type story. And I don't think any of us want that as adults coming to a memoir. I'm sure you would agree. Feel free to put your comments if you feel the same or different. All right, so the other couple things I wanted to talk about was a spiritual attack I've been experiencing, and then also my method for structuring. So with the spiritual attack, I feel like this week I had the most obvious attack from the adversary I have ever had in my life. I've always been a religious person, so it's not that I've been unaware that Satan can come for you, but I would say I've never had an experience where I felt like Satan just was like coming for me. But this week I had that without a doubt. It was about 36 hours of hell that I had this week. And I'll tell you what happened, and why I think it was just a direct attack from Satan. And I do believe it is connected to my writing. Let's see, middle of the week, maybe it was Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday, I don't remember. I had a day where I just woke up feeling sad and dreary. And then I met a friend for lunch, and some things she said just got me thinking, and it was downhill from there. And not just because I'm a mental health therapist, and I know thinking errors, and I know triggers, and I know what that looks like. But this was so extreme. The whole day, I just felt darker and darker and darker until I had suicidal feelings by the time night came. And all of it was around feelings of being rejected by people, never being enough, total failure in my life, meaninglessness, worthlessness, feeling hated. And it was so extreme. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, all of those feelings felt like a 10. I felt literally worthless. And there was nothing that happened that was a genuine trigger. Like I say, I went to lunch with a friend, and there were a couple things she said that got me thinking, but she was like very kind, and we had a lovely time. But that whole day, by the time night came, I was sobbing and like rocking in the corner and going, I don't know how to go on. It's really hard for me to talk about without feeling emotional because I just felt this darkness and this sense of hatred. It's like hatred was literally crushing me. It's this intense spiritual darkness that it's hard to describe. But I went from I'm a very happy person and I have a fantastic life. But I felt in the space of just a few hours like maybe death was better. And I talked to my husband, I prayed, I cried. He gave me a blessing, which is something we do in my church where there's some spiritual energy imparted for healing. I felt a little better. We talked some more. I slept okay, but in the morning, I felt the darkness come upon me again. And that morning, I sat writing, journaling, crying, praying, and just again, struggling, feeling like I'm hated, I'm worthless. Life is, I'm genuinely hated by everyone and genuinely making no difference in anyone's life. And just the only way I can describe it is just an intense feeling of being totally, utterly worthless and hated. And that suicide would be a better option than going on. Now, of course, I'm wiser and I have enough resilience that wasn't an option. I started to realize in the morning it was a spiritual attack. And the more I realized that, then I knew what to do. I knew what to pray for and I knew what to do. And I was able to get that adversarial element to move on. And I felt much lighter once I was able to identify that and move it on. But I feel very strongly that this spiritual attack was aimed at me because I'm writing my story. Not because my story is going to save the world. It's going to help me. And it will probably help some other people. But I think Satan gets really pissed when we want to tell the truth and when we want to learn in a very targeted way, like writing. The thing about writing is it forces you to really extract the truth, to extract life's lessons, to reflect and to learn in such a way. It's so powerful. And I think it just really ticks him off. And for whatever the case, I definitely experienced an intense spiritual attack this week. I know it was about my writing because I'm trying to do something good. And I know it really ticks off Satan. And I've never had anything like that before in my life. And it was really interesting talking to my husband about it afterwards. Because again, I'm a therapist. I'm like, I know this was not triggered by any particular thing. I'm really, really good at doing what's called the behavioral chain analysis and noticing, I think this thing that I was feeling was related to that, or I think this thing happened because of that. And I was vulnerable because of these things. I really wasn't vulnerable. I've been eating and sleeping well and feeling fine. I genuinely know it came directly from the adversary. And I think it's because I'm trying to do something good and I'm really, really working hard. So I just wanted to document that because it was a horrible, hellacious experience for me. But it's important for me to, a couple things. First of all, know that it was from Satan. And if I get that exact same feeling again, I will be more prepared next time to call it out, identify it, and ask for the spiritual strength I need. The second of all, when you get an attack like that and you're trying really hard to do something good, you can know that the devil's really mad about what you're doing. And that means try harder, keep doing it harder, keep doing it more belligerently than ever against him because he doesn't like it. So do it harder until he gives up on attacking you. All right, the third thing I wanted to talk about is that today I'm going to be working on structure for my memoir. And structure's been something I have struggled with a ton because like I've mentioned, I've had this idea to write this book for years. But when I think about structure, I am definitely more of a pantser. I just want to write it down and have it be good enough and not think about it. I actually wrote a memoir a few years ago and I did it that way and it ended poorly. It just did. I don't even know what I did. It's just a glob of thousands of words sitting in a Word doc in my computer, and I don't know what to do with it. When I do want to tell that story, I'm going to have to start from scratch because there just isn't any structure to it. So what I'm doing today is I am going to work on structuring the introduction to the book. I've got the outline for 3 or 4 tri-fail cycles with an introduction and a conclusion, and today I'm going to be working on just that introduction portion, which is the hook, and then some of the backstory with the hook. So it starts with a story of something incredibly devastating and violent that happens in my family, and then I have to tell some backstory around that. So how I have kind of structured that is I have, my hook, which is the story, and then the backstory. Those are the elements I need to tell. I'm going to take little Post-it notes and write each little element on small Post-its, and then the bigger elements on large Post-its, and cluster them together and move them around physically on a timeline until I see that this is how I want that first maybe 15% of my book to be written. So I'll put the elements on Post-its and physically move them around on a table in front of me till it feels right, and then I'll feel more ready to start writing. So that's my plan for working on structure today. I'm going to go ahead and head into the library, and when I'm done at the end of the day, I will report back and let you know how that went. Well, I'm done with the library, and I want to report back what I was able to get done. What I did is I took my Post-it notes and I wrote down all the little details I wanted to put in this first part of my book, along with main chunks of scenes. And then I set them across a big table. There probably were maybe at least 100 or more Post-its. And then I started categorizing them in a timeline of what would happen first, second, third, and then categorizing them by themes. And I ended up with, I think, about 25 clusters of Post-it notes. And then I put them in a notebook just by cluster. So I numbered each cluster and put them in a notebook. And that way I can go through this notebook and start working on each cluster to write my scenes. I think it's going to work well. It's kind of, I guess, feels like arts and crafts time with all those Post-it notes. But I am armed and ready to go write that first part of my book, maybe the first 15% or so. So, all right, put in any comments below if you have any thoughts or questions, and I hope this is exciting and helpful for you to follow my process, and I would love to hear how yours is going too. See you next time.